Many years ago, my mom and I went ghost hunting in St. Augustine, Florida. We went to the St. Augustine Lighthouse and Lightkeeper's House, and when we finished touring the keeper's house, we decided we were going to go back to the lighthouse. We weren't sure if the previous group was still in the lighthouse, so we waited outside, and we had heard footsteps, so we assumed there were still some people inside. After waiting a while and nobody came out, we eventually pushed the door open and walked in and gave a cursory, anyone still in here, shout, and it was empty, to say the least. So, me and my mom and a couple of the other people in our group decided to go back in, and I went up a couple of the flights in the lighthouse. My mom stayed at the bottom, and all of a sudden I just hear a shout from below me. And the two people who had come in with us ran out of the lighthouse, followed shortly by my mother, who said, "I'll see you outside," and ran right after them. So there I was, alone at that point in the lighthouse where clearly something had just happened. So I slowly make my way back down, and once I get outside, my mom says, the two people who were in there, they said, "Oh my God, I just saw it." And if you know the stories of the St. Augustine Lighthouse, what they saw was someone leaning over this landing up much further than I was. So I was left alone in a very spooky place. But I realized something strange that night. Fear didn't necessarily feel bad, it just made me feel really alive. So, why does fear make us feel good sometimes? There's a theory called scare play that's actually quite common across species. We see it in humans, especially when we're young. We play hide and seek or tag, where there's an element of fear involved with being caught. But you also see it in other species, like lion cubs sneaking up on their parents, or in how we love the horror genre as a whole. Researchers have found that we often allow these experiences to happen because of the way we frame our thoughts about them. This is called the protective frame theory. And depending on the research you look at, there's anywhere from 3 to 4 different types of frames that we use. The first one is confidence frame. When we feel like we're with professionals who know what they're doing, or we ourselves have a set of skills that allow us to feel secure in our interactions, we feel more comfortable in situations that would be scary. So think a professional tour guide in a haunted house, or going on safari rides where you're with someone who's very used to being around these dangerous animals. We have a sense of confidence because of the situation that we're in. This allows us to interact with these things without that huge sense of fear. We have an innate sense of safety built in. The next one is the safety zone. Basically, this is when there's some sort of physical or perceived safety barrier between you and the danger. A good example of this might be if you go diving with sharks and you're inside of a cage. You are physically protected from a situation that could be quite dangerous. And yet, we now have a built-in sense of safety that comes along with that danger. Another is the detachment frame. This is where we might interact with something that is perceived dangerous or scary, but from a step back, like watching horror movies or listening to true crime. We're not the ones directly in the situation, and yet we still get the emotions of that danger without the actual danger itself. And the last one is the perspective frame. Sometimes our brains are able to overcome the fear of doing something if we have a perceived benefit from it. Think something like extreme sports. People get this sense of glory or the rush of actually competing in these sports. And so even though they know it's dangerous, and they may have a certain amount of confidence built up in their skills, they're also participating because they're gaining something from the experience. In the end, a lot of these experiences that we love, going to haunted houses, watching horror movies, listening to true crime podcasts, it's a way for our brains to almost practice being scared, practice being in these situations. And it helps us be more prepared when we actually face them, have more tolerance to these emotions. How does this actually work inside? What exactly is going on in our brains that makes these things that should be scary thrilling? Well, it comes from the release of adrenaline and dopamine during the experiences. Of course, not all of us are created equal when it comes to things like neurotransmitters. There's different variations of several genes that are responsible for the release of dopamine and the release of adrenaline. One in particular, DRD4, is one of the ones that's very heavily studied, and there's many variants of this gene. However, some of them cause extreme behaviors for seeking this kind of thrill, this risk-seeking behavior. This can go to the extreme of substance abuse or really risky behaviors. But these genes don't doom us to risky behaviors. They just change that risk-reward level in your brain. But it's not just our brains that invite us into this more scary, deeper, reflective times. The seasons also affect us. Autumn brings a natural inclination to turn towards the spooky, and it's not just because all the Halloween decorations start going up. This is a time where, across the world, many cultures see it as the thinning of the veils. As autumn approaches and the days get shorter, our brains release more melatonin, which puts us more in a reflective, sleepy state that just makes us way more perceptive to the world around us. It gives us a natural inclination to turn inward, to be more aware of the other, and it makes us seek more ghost stories and these liminal spaces that we love. Across the world, many cultures see this time of the year as the time when the veil is the thinnest, when the worlds collide, so to speak, for the time when we're most connected to our deceased loved ones. Many different cultures celebrate this through festivals such as Samhain or Oban and Dia de los Muertos. But after all that buildup of all the scary stories and haunted houses, there's one more piece that makes us come back for more. Perhaps the most important part is that cathartic release at the end. After all of that adrenaline and sympathetic nervous system activation, the body responds with a rush of endorphins. This gives you that sense of calm afterwards, but it also reinforces the behavior in the first place. That's why we keep going back for more, even though we still feel scared. Where we may have that sense of dread as we're walking into the haunted house, but we do it anyways, because we love that feeling at the end. That's what I felt that night in St. Augustine. The rush, the release, the strange calm afterwards. Maybe that's why we chase ghosts or press play on the next horror movie. Not because we want to feel the fear, but because we want to remember that we can survive it. Do you notice any patterns in the kind of thrill or mystery you're drawn to this time of year? If you love exploring the space where science meets spirit, where dopamine meets divination, or data meets the divine, make sure you hit subscribe. Until next time, stay curious.